Hey, what's up, guys? This is Rubio Monocoat versus Odies oil. This is a project that is near and dear to me as it's my dining room table, and I have applied countless layers of Odies oil to it at this point. And overall, I was not happy with the consistency of the finish. It was dried out and required a lot of maintenance. Now, at this point, I had applied almost an entire jar of Odies oil, and I didn't want to make this my continuing weekend project. But most importantly, I was dissatisfied with the level of protection it provided. If you have as many kids as I do, this is just not an ideal situation. So I decided to use the Rubio two-part oil, and I'd heard a lot about it. I was super excited and had really high hopes for it. It was time to put on the gloves and take a swing at this thing. So one of my biggest concerns was that the Odies oil that was currently on the surface was going to cause the Rubio to not set up and cure properly. I had had issues with polyurethane in the past, just not curing, and I was a little concerned. So I wanted to make sure I really did it right. I started off with the isopropyl 99 and quickly realized it just wasn't strong enough. It wasn't going to pull up much oil. So I went ahead and just started using the acetone. By the way, if you're going to use any type of solvent on nice furniture, make sure you're using a white terry cloth. I have had issues in the past using colored microfibers where the solvent will cause the color in the cloth to actually bleed out onto your material, and you definitely don't want that to happen. So I grabbed the Makita random orbital, slapped some 120 on it, and quickly realized, guys, you just do not want to do this. Okay. It's going to blast so much dust around your house. You're going to be miserable. Your wife is going to get pissed off. And it's just going to create too much work. So I ended up wrapping it up pretty quickly here and put the Makita back on the shelf and went on a little road trip. Right down the street, my buddy has got some pretty cool tools, and I decided to ask him if I could borrow a dust extractor and a decent sander. So you probably asking, why would you not just take the table outside or bring it down to the shop or work on it in the garage? Well, listen, this thing weighs over 200 pounds. I'd have to take it off the legs, bring it outside, do the whole deal. And really, I just wanted to work on it where it was at. And I'm really glad and fortunate that I have some friends with some cool tools because I don't think I would have wanted to do it any other way. This Festool stuff works really, really well. I was able to sand in my house and not get sawdust all over the place, which was extremely helpful. It kept the mess down to a minimum, especially using this really nice 3M sandpaper they make. I'll put a link to the sandpaper and the Festool stuff in the description. Here, I'm simply sanding with a 120 grit on a random orbital sander. You'll see I have a second sander here that has a nice edge tool. It's got an edge adapter on it. And what it does is just makes a nice, clean, square edge when you're using a lower grit paper. I use this on all grits for this project. If I was going to do it again, I would probably just use it on anything 120 and lower. With the higher grits, you don't really have to worry too much about taking off too much from the top there. Between each sanding, I did acetone wipe down. You can see I'm getting quite a bit of that Odies oil up off of the table, and that's exactly what I was going for. Then in this step, I did a water pop. You can see some of the color come back, although it's temporary. It's just going to dry. I let the water dry for about an hour, and then kind of just did a brush over with my hand to feel if I was getting any raised pores on it. I actually didn't. The table was super smooth even after the water pop, which was a good sign. It means it's nice and stable underneath, and I could just proceed with the next bit of sanding. So I went from the 120 to 180, 220, and then 240. So a little bit about this table. It is Indonesian monkeypod, and it has a bit of a history. I had imported it along with a bunch of other tables and slabs. And this one didn't quite make it in shipping. It had cracked and I had to repair it. It was basically something I couldn't sell to anybody. And I decided to keep it. And it has some flaws and imperfections, but I thought the wood was so beautiful that I could, I could just deal with some of the imperfections that it had. Also knowing that it wasn't going to waste and I could actually use it. The original finish that was done at our factory was a gloss coat. And because the table had some structural issues because it had got dropped or something during shipping, the top gloss coat had actually cracked at the epoxy river. So what I did was I added some C channels to the bottom, and I also took the table to an industrial drum sander and whacked off the entire clear coat on both sides. And then I started using the Odies oil. And that's when I knew that I had messed up in the choice of finish because the Odies oil was so beautiful when it went on and it was seemed like it was worth the work. But for me, oiling a full-size dining table 15 times a year was just not practical for me. So here I am with the 240 grit. This is the final sand that I had put on, and we're ready for some Rubios. Okay. No, not the Odies. Yeah, let's go Rubio. Okay, so the Rubio is really easy to use. You take the oil, right, and then it's got an activator, and you mix them together. But make sure each one's individually mixed first. Obviously, use a little stir stick or chopstick, whatever you got. Scrape the sides while you're doing it. Make sure it's real mixed, and then you do 3 to 1. So I use the glass jar. You could use plastic. It doesn't seem like there's much real activation going on. It's not like an epoxy. It doesn't get hot or anything. And you'll notice here how much I use, which is just way too much. By the way, pull the stick out of there while you're pouring it. It's just unnecessary and kind of more work than it needs to be. Okay, so you just pour the activator in, you mix it up, and then you will take it and just pour it over the top of the table, kind of in a zigzag. And you'll see when I do it, it goes on super smooth. It's almost like an olive oil or something, and you can tell it penetrates the wood, but it doesn't absorb a ton. So this amount right here is probably enough for 5 tables. I really messed up here and I wasted a lot of this expensive finish. So don't be like me. On the second coat, which you'll see in a little bit, I used 30 milliliters total, and it was more than enough. I was actually had enough on this round, obviously, to do my bench top as well. And on the second round with the 30 mils, I had enough for the bench as well for the second coat there. Here, I'm just adding a little more activator because I realized I probably didn't put enough in the first time. Again, use syringes and you'll be totally fine. You can measure this out a lot more effectively than what I did here. Now you just pour it over the top. I thought I was gonna pour in several sections and do maybe 2 or 3 sections at a time. It turns out this amount right here was more than enough for the entire table, including the edges. So you just take this scraper, and there's not really you know any sort of technique that you need to do with this. You'll see it comes out a little bit uneven. You've got some lines and whatnot. I didn't notice any of those lines sticking or staying or leaving marks in this particular wood. But if you had a wood that was less forgiving, maybe a little softer wood, you might want to make sure you don't have any streaks while you're doing it. But you can see I actually left a little pile or a little puddle of it here in the corner. And then I took a cheap paintbrush and did the edges. If I was going to do it again, I don't think I'd use that brush. um, you could probably just use your hand in a latex glove. So here's a part where I totally screwed up. I took an automotive buffer, and you're supposed to buff this stuff out. You could do it by hand, and I thought, hey, I'd take a machine just because it'll be faster. And I couldn't get this pad to stay on the buffer because of the stickiness of the monocoat that's on there. So I got out a polisher that I had handy also, just in case that didn't work. The polisher worked really, really well. There's a couple things I didn't like about it. It did get wool all over the place. This is a genuine wool pad, and it was the again because the coat was so sticky. It actually ripped out little chunks of the wool and kind of got all over the place, and I had some dusting to do, and I had to vacuum it. But this is what the table looks like after the first coat of Rubio Monocoat. I'm pretty happy with it at this point, although it doesn't have quite the sheen that it needed. And I'm gonna show you another little mistake here that I had. I should have sanded the entire table, including the epoxy river. But if you notice that first round that I was doing, I didn't sand the epoxy river. It came out uneven. I wasn't super happy with it. So I taped it off and did a good sanding job at 240 over the top. Now this is a day after the first coat, about 24 hours later. I'm taking a 3M finishing pad. The maroon one seems to be the right color to use for scuffing up the finish, because I want to be able to have that second coat bond to the first coat effectively. So I cut out a little template. I just used a an old piece of sandpaper and cut out a nice little circle, slapped it to the random orbital sander, and it worked really well. It stuck to the pad nicely and got a pretty decent finish. So I sanded one direction, then I sanded the other direction just to make sure that I got good enough coverage for this scuffing. And after going over it with this pad, I just wiped it down really well. I used a microfiber, pretty basic, but you want to make sure all the dust is off of here. Now, Rubio does sell a wood cleaner specifically for stuff like this, and I didn't have any. I would definitely order some and have some on hand if I was going to do this again. But microfiber seemed to work well enough. So now I'm ready for that second coat of Odies. So what I learned from the first coat is you don't need very much of this material at all. I kind of eyeballed the first one, and I just poured what I thought might work as, if I was using polyurethane or something. But this stuff's much, much different. So I decided I was going to use 30 mils of the oil and 10 mils of the activator. I know previously I said 30 mils, but it's 30 of the oil and 10 of the activator, and that gives me a total of 40 mils. And I had enough to do the entire tabletop, a bench top, and I had just a little bit left over, a comfortable amount left over, but it had used almost all of it. And that was a much more effective use of this monocoat. One thing I will mention, if you're going to use syringes to measure, make sure you have two syringes. You don't want to mix the syringe that's been in the oil into the syringe that's been in the activator, because that can set the whole thing off. And then you might not be able to use it in the future, or it could cause some ill effects. So now on the second coat, I applied it very similarly to the first coat. I just poured a little bit out in kind of a zigzag fashion and then worked my way through it. And you can see on this coat, it gets even a deeper finish, which I was really excited to see. And on the edges, instead of using a brush, I just took my hand and rubbed it in, and it seemed to work out just as well, maybe if not better than a brush. And the next thing I did was I just hand buffed it, and it wasn't bad at all. This was actually easier than hand buffing the Odies because although it's thick, it's not as thick and sticky as Odies is. At this point, I was really satisfied with the color. This was using the Monocoat Pure, which I guess has a slight tinge to it, and I was really happy with the color. This is what it looked like after it dried, and even a couple weeks later, as I'm recording the voiceover, it's basically the same color, and I I'm very happy with it, and also I'm happy with how well it's holding up so far. You know, I might give you an update in a future video after about a year to kind of see how it holds up in the home, but this is a very actively used table. My kids do homeschool on this table. They eat on it, they play. I mean, this thing gets used like a cheap party table. Nobody's using coasters on it. But listen, if you've stuck with me for this long through this video, I really appreciate it. If you could go ahead and hit that like and ring the subscription bell, I would really appreciate it. And go ahead and leave me some comments and let me know what you think about this and if you've had any other similar experiences with Odies or Rubio. Thanks so much for watching, guys. We'll see you on the next video, and hopefully I'll have an even more exciting build for you.